Welcome back to the Wednesday night Bible study. We're looking at the story of David. This is the eighth installment. We're in 1 Samuel chapter 25, and I'm calling this Good Advice. This is good advice. It's not coming from the Lord. It's not coming from David. It's from an unexpected person. So last week, we talked about revenge, an incident in David's life where he could have gotten even and even killed the king, in fact. But he didn't. He respected God. He respected God as the only one to avenge. It was up to God to deal with the anointed King Saul. God blessed David for resisting the temptation of vengeance, and there was peace between King Saul and David. King Saul went so far as to say this to David in 1 Samuel 24:19. May the Lord reward you well for the way you treated me today. I know that you will surely be king, and that the kingdom of Israel will be established in your hands. All right, today we're going to look at anger. David was human just like us. Here's a story where he has a moment of hot-headedness, and it could have had serious consequences. The result would have been murder. It's also a story of a wise woman who God used to turn David's hostile heart. So the story begins in chapter 25. Remember that King Saul's manhunt has been called off, for now anyway. David and his men have returned to En-Gedi. There was peace. But something sad then happened for the nation of Israel. And that's at the beginning of chapter 25. Samuel died. Now Samuel died, and all Israel assembled and mourned for him, and they buried him at his home in Ramah. Samuel was Israel's last judge, and also an important prophet. He died. Samuel had been the spiritual conscience of Israel. He was the spokesman for God. He was the one who anointed Saul and watched him turn away from God, and then he was also the one who anointed David and watched him running for his life. Sadly, he would never get to see David become the king of Israel. So it goes from there. Then David moved down into the desert of Maon. A certain man in Maon, who had property there at Carmel, was very wealthy. He had 1,000 goats and 3,000 sheep, which he was shearing in Carmel. His name was Nabal, I think. Nabal is how I'll pronounce him. His name was Nabal, and his wife's name was Abigail. She was an intelligent and beautiful woman, but her husband, a Calebite, was surly and mean in his dealings. So here we have David left the caves to make a living in the wilderness of Maon in Judah. In context, we see that David and his men employed themselves in protecting the local ranchers and their herds. This was a needed protection back then. Their job was to protect them from wild animals and thieves. There were no contracts signed, no set fee, but it was customary for ranchers to compensate their protectors with a small portion of the harvest and the herds. So in this situation, David and his men had been protecting the ranch of this wealthy man named Nabal, and it was now sheep shearing time. Time for Nabal to collect the wool and the profits from his vast herd. And this would then be the time for the protectors, that would be David and his men of the ranch, to get something. Two important people to the story are described here. Nabal, a descendant of the heroic Caleb. Remember, he was a Calebite. So that was Caleb of Joshua and Caleb's day, just right after Moses. It says he was surly and mean in his dealings. His name in Hebrew means fool. Abigail, another character, intelligent, clear-thinking, and wise. The opposite of her husband. Opposites attract, they say. Maybe it was an arranged marriage. I don't know what happened there. Her name means whose father is joy. And then there's David and his men. They've been a shield around Nabal's shepherds and flocks. They've not taken so much as one stray lamb during the year. They've risked their lives for Nabal and his ranch. So for this story, we have a stubborn, foolish husband, a wise wife, and a frustrated hero. I think we'll all agree, as this story unfolds, if we had to pick a hero, it's not Nabal and it's not even David. It's going to be Abigail. She manages to stay true to her husband, to God, and to herself. Let's look at the story. There's a lot of text here. While David was in the desert, he heard that Nabal was shearing sheep. So he sent 10 young men and said to them, "Go up to Nabal at Carmel and greet him in my name. Say to him, 'Long life to you, good health to you and your household, and good health to all that is yours.' Now I hear that it is sheep shearing time. When your shepherds were with us, we did not mistreat them, and the whole time they were at Carmel, nothing of theirs was missing. Ask your own servants, and they will tell you. Therefore be favorable toward my young men, since we come at a festive time. Please give your servants and your son David whatever you can find for them." So it's time to request a share of the profit. It's payday. David isn't pushy. He isn't demanding. He's respectful. He's extremely gracious. And how does Nabal respond? Okay, that was the part we just did. Sorry. When David's men arrived, they gave Nabal this message in David's name. Then they waited. Nabal answered David's servants, "Who is this David? Who is this son of Jesse? Many servants are breaking away from their masters these days. Why should I take my bread and water and the meat I have slaughtered for my shearers and give it to men coming from who knows where?" David's men turned around and went back. When they arrived, they reported every word. David and his men are not treated well. Nabal snubs them, thinks of them as rebellious runaways after all they've done for him. So he sends the men back empty-handed. David said to his men, "Put on your swords." So they put on their swords, and David put on his. About 400 men went up with David, while 200 stayed with the supplies. So David got the response. The same man who has been so patient in earlier troubles, the same man who had shown such faith and trust in God, could this really be the same person, readying for a fight, for murder? It looks like he's getting ready to take revenge, to get even. The same David who left revenge in God's hands in last week's story against King Saul. What's the difference here? I don't know. Now let's see what Abigail finds out, what she does when she finds out about the conflict. In verse 14, one of the servants told Nabal's wife Abigail, "David sent messengers from the desert to give our master his greetings, but he hurled insults at them. Yet these men were very good to us. They did not mistreat us, and the whole time we were out in the fields near them, nothing was missing. Night and day they were a wall around us. All the time we were herding our sheep near them. Now think it over and see what you can do, because disaster is hanging over our master and his whole household. He is such a wicked man that no one can talk to him." So Nabal's own employees see how valuable David and his men have been. The servant is worried about what David will do to Nabal and all of them. The servant gives more of a description of Nabal. Nabal, wicked. No one can talk to him. Now let's read what Abigail does about this. Abigail lost no time. She took 200 loaves of bread, 2 skins of wine, 5 dressed sheep, 5 seahs of roasted grain, 100 cakes of raisins, and 200 cakes of pressed figs, and loaded them on donkeys. Then she told her servants, "Go on ahead, I'll follow you." But she did not tell her husband Nabal. So Abigail acts quickly, gathers a generous amount of food and wine, probably prepared for the sheep shearing banquet, and then sends her servants to intercept David in the hills. She is so wise. She doesn't try to defend her husband, but she doesn't give him up. She doesn't give up on him. She takes action to stop what will likely happen to the whole household. But I think this action is also to protect David. David is the soon-to-be king. By stopping his murderous intent, she's protecting his reputation. Let's read what he's about to do. Think what that will do to his reputation. As a man of God, a man who trusts in his faith in God, here's what we're hearing. As she came riding her donkey into a mountain ravine, there were David and his men descending toward her, and she met them. David had just said, "It's been useless. All my watching over this fellow's property in the desert so that nothing of his was missing. He has paid me back evil for good." And here's the threat. May God deal with David, be it ever so severely, if by morning I leave alive one male of all who belong to him. David is intent on evil. He may have good reasons, but acting on revengeful thoughts is not good. This would not be good for the soon-to-be king. Now, a long speech from Abigail is next. I'm going to go ahead and read it. It shows what a wise woman she is. When Abigail saw David, she quickly got off her donkey and bowed down before David with her face to the ground. She fell at his feet and said, My lord, let the blame be on me alone. Please let your servant speak to you. Hear what your servant has to say. May my lord pay no attention to that wicked man Nabal. He is just like his name. His name is Fool, and folly goes with him. But as for me, your servant, I did not see the men my master sent. Now since the Lord has kept you, my master, from bloodshed and from avenging yourself with your own hands, as surely as the Lord lives, and as you live, may your enemies and all who intend to harm my master be like Nabal. And let this gift which your servant has brought to my master be given to the men who follow you. Please forgive your servant's offense, for the Lord will certainly make a lasting dynasty for my master, because he fights the Lord's battles. Let no wrongdoing be found in you as long as you live. Even though someone is pursuing you to take your life, the life of my master will be bound securely in the bundle of the living by the Lord your God. But the lives of your enemies he will hurl away as from the pocket of a sling. When the Lord has done for my master every good thing he promised concerning him, and has appointed him leader over Israel, my master will not have on his conscience the staggering burden of needless bloodshed or of having avenged himself. And when the Lord has brought my master success, remember your servant. If you'll notice, Abigail displays her faith in God. She credits the Lord with restraining David from murder. She credits the Lord with forming a new dynasty through David. She is tactful. She acknowledges Nabal's fault in this conflict. She respectfully addresses David's part in this conflict. She also remains loyal to her husband. She's honest about his good-for-nothing character, but she doesn't desert him by joining David's group, and she doesn't set her husband up. What we can see in Abigail are some good traits that we can all try to attain: faith, tact, and loyalty. When you're in the middle of a conflict, and when you need some advice, wouldn't these be good attributes of what they tell you? Maybe from a friend, maybe even from a stranger. Add to that, it sometimes takes courage to tell it like it is. I love her getting down to it and pulling no punches when she says in verse 31, my master, meaning you, David, will not have on his conscience the staggering burden of needless bloodshed. So I'm going to stop with a cliffhanger here. How will David react to this woman named Abigail and her speech? How will he react to such wisdom, such good advice from this stranger? We'll find out next time. In the meantime, be safe, take care, and may the Lord be with you.